Okay, we just discovered an ocean route over here with this map. We are just roaming around. And I thought, why not let's use the TNT. नीचे कुछ भी नहीं है. यहाँ पे भी कुछ भी नहीं है. Oh, that's not Guardian. Where is Elder Guardian? And it's on this. Okay, I think that's. हाँ या बेटा. Okay. No, that's just trash can logic. Yeah, one more TNT. Nope, I do not. I think this is the time. Oh, I think there are three of this. Oh, she dropped a sponge. Okay. I'm officially lost. Okay, there is this. the second sponge. Okay, at this point, let's just find this third guardian. Okay, nope. We're not that. I'm not fighting this battle. Okay, I think I can use this. But Ask Elder Guardian. कितना बड़ा है ये? Guy. I think the guardians are usually over here. Okay, there is a sponge room. Where is the elder guardian? Nothing's over here. Oh, dude. Can't find it with an X-ray as well. That's a different level of. Damn it. Okay, I am stupid. Enter it from here. Nothing over here. This is the spawn room. Oh, that's fine. But where is the guardian? Okay, there. Jeez. I think I just found her. She's right over here. That shall be one. Okay, there is none over here. think I can survive this. But I don't think I can survive this. Hey, whoa. Then just I don't care how slow this is. You're dying today. I want to finish this. I think it was. Okay. Oh, that was a fruitful trip. To go this direction. Oh, oh, thank God I came back. Last rocket. I think I can reach my waypoint. Within a few minutes. Let's gain the speed first. Inside the engine. what we gotta do is we wanted to make pillager XP farm today. So damage that. Okay, we forgot to play anything in the background. We gotta build it in the middle of the ocean.
Irenaeus, a Roman theologian, predicted that Jesus would return in the year 500. The mathematician Michael Stifel calculated that the Judgment Day would begin on the 19th of October, 1533, at exactly 8 a.m. Anne Lee, the leader of the Shakers movement, claimed the second coming of Christ would be through a woman, and in 1770, her followers called Anne the divine manifestation of Christ herself. Richard Brothers, a retired sailor, predicted Jesus' return between 1793 and 1795. He was later admitted to an insane asylum. Joseph Morris told his followers in 1861 not to plant crops for food because he firmly believed that Christ will return tomorrow. Ronald Wyland predicted that Jesus would return on the 29th of September 2011. When his prediction failed to come true, he moved the date of Jesus' return to the 27th of May 2012. When that prediction failed, he moved it again to the 18th of May 2013. Wyland was later convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison. That was just a small handful of the thousands of second coming predictions over the years, all of which have had one thing in common. They were all wrong. And I mean, isn't this obvious? Christ said that no one knows the hour of his return. Not humans, not the angels, not even Jesus himself. So today I am not going to add my name to the list of failed predictions. Instead, we're going to look at the Bible and learn everything we can about the second coming. There's 3 parts to this journey I'd like to take you on: the promise, the preparation, and the return. Each part holds a unique piece to the puzzle, and by the end of the video, you'll know everything you need to know to prepare you and your family for the return of Christ and the end of the world. But before answering that question, I want to talk about sleep. Yeah, I'm being serious. You spend 1/3 of your entire life in your bed. If you live to 100 years old, you would have spent about 33 years in bed. 33 years! That's insane! Before doing YouTube, I sold mattresses for a living. And I watched people come in and spend over $10,000 trying to fix their restless sleep. Thankfully, Manta Sleep has a solution at a fraction of the cost. They make the best sleep masks in the world, designed for day nappers and deep sleepers alike. I personally have fallen in love with the Bluetooth mask, which lets me listen to worship music as I drift off to sleep each night. I've slept just about everywhere with this thing and it's never let me down. Grab a mask today using the link in the description and using code BIBLE at checkout for 10% off. Thanks again to Manta Sleep. Starting with the promise. Christ's first coming was not unannounced, and neither is his second coming. Hundreds of years before Christ took his first breath as a human, the prophet Daniel caught a glimpse of something profound. A scene where an incredible figure dubbed the Son of Man returns to earth on the clouds to establish an everlasting kingdom. Why is this important? Because the idea of the return of Christ wasn't something the grieving disciples simply invented to help them cope with his departure. It was planned way back in the Old Testament. Jesus himself says he is going away to prepare a place for us. He will return, come and pick us up, and bring us back to the place he's prepared. We even have an angel confirm Jesus' return is the real deal. When the disciples watched Jesus ascend into the clouds, an angel confirmed that Christ would return in the same way he departed. So we can be absolutely confident that Christ will return someday. But the real question is, what will his return look like? How can we prepare, and how will we know when the time is near? Well, the Bible lays out two large-scale occurrences that will appear between Christ's ascension and his second coming. Understanding each one is crucial if you want to be prepared for Christ's return. The Synoptic Gospels all record specific signs that will occur before Christ's return, specifically to do with the sun and stars. Matthew and Mark actually say the sun and moon will be darkened and the stars will fall from heaven. Pretty crazy stuff. The other passages suggest that great natural disasters will mark the beginning of the end. We know that when sin first entered the world through Adam, the creation was cursed as a result. Perhaps this is the corrupted creation's response to the return of its creator. And I need to make this clear. Christ didn't reveal this to us to make us scared or fearful of the end times. Rather, he is warning us to be prepared. This is especially true for the second occurrence, false claims. Before the true Christ returns for a second time to establish his everlasting kingdom, there will be many false Christs who pretend to be him. Jesus said that many will come in my name, saying, "I am he, and the time is at hand." But do not go after them. Some will claim that they are the Messiah who has returned. Others will deny Christ's return altogether. They will scoff and say, "Where is this promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation." Many false messiahs will arise, but one will captivate the entire world with his lies. That one being the Antichrist. We recently made a video comparing the true Christ to the Antichrist, and we explored things in that video that no one else has explored on YouTube. Well, you might be asking, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus left. Perhaps God has forgotten about us. Well, at the end of this video, I'll tell you my answer as to why the second coming is taking so long, and it's probably not what you're expecting. Now, if you thought that Jesus' return was a mystery we'll never understand until it happens, you're dead wrong. Because there are dozens upon dozens of Bible verses describing his second coming in great detail. Many coming from the mouth of the returning king himself. What happens when Christ returns? Well, there's three phases to this dramatic arrival. The first is the arrival phase, where Christ is seen coming on the clouds before all humanity. There will be a great mourning as Christ appears, a large-scale realization that Christ was in fact real, and did in fact return in glory. The second is the resurrection phase, specifically those who died trusting in Christ. Christ will arrive with his army of white cavalry, and a myriad of countless believers will be carried into the sky to meet Christ there. In a twinkle of the eye, all of us who love Jesus will be transformed, granted new heavenly bodies to replace our old sin-addicted bodies. The third phase is a little less comfortable. The judgment phase. This is why people were mourning before. Christ will return to judge the living and the dead. He has returned for a specific purpose, to finally separate the sheep from the goats, to repay each person according to what they have done, to sentence those who did not obey the good news to an eternity in destruction, to destroy the Antichrist once and for all with the breath of his mouth, to put an end to time and space itself, to cast Satan and his angels into the lake of eternal fire, to establish his new everlasting kingdom, and to defeat the final enemy of mankind, death. I promised before to tell you why the second coming has taken so long. So here is the reason. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. The second coming hasn't happened yet, not because God has forgotten about us, but for the exact opposite reason. When Christ returns, it's game over. There's no more opportunities to repent and turn to God. In his loving patience, he is holding the door to salvation open for as long as possible. But someday, the door will be shut. Everything I've said in this video so far has led to this single point. Be prepared. Christ described his return as a thief in the night. No one knows when a thief will strike, so it's best to be prepared for him at all times. In the physical world, you can prepare for a thief by locking your house, installing security cameras, or hiding valuable goods. In the spiritual world, you can prepare for the second coming by storing up your treasures in heaven, living in step with the kingdom of God, reading and obeying his word, and telling as many people as possible that the door won't be open forever. If you haven't taken a step through that door yet, I beg of you, please meet Jesus for yourself. He is the best thing that will ever happen to you. Read the Gospel of John and commit your life to him today.
Do you think only one would do me harm then good? We'll clean up afterwards. Let's get up as high as possible.
Before Adam took his first breath, before Eve ever opened her eyes, before a single human footprint touched the earth, God had already been creating, and the creatures he made before us. They weren't cute little animals in a garden. Some of them had 6 wings and were covered in eyes. Some were made entirely of fire. One of them was so terrifying that just looking at it would kill you. The Bible describes at least 7 beings that God created before humanity, and they're buried in books and passages that Sunday school conveniently skips over. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Job, Genesis, Revelation. These creatures show up across the entire text, and when you actually read the original Hebrew and Greek descriptions, they sound less like angels and more like something out of a cosmic horror novel. But here's what really gets interesting. These beings weren't just sitting around in heaven doing nothing. They had specific jobs, specific ranks, and some of them went rogue. So let's go through all 7, from the ones you might have heard of to the one creature so mysterious that scholars have been arguing about it for over 2,000 years. And I'll tell you right now, by the time we get to number 1, you're going to look at the Bible completely differently, okay? Let's start with the ones everyone thinks they know. Angels, or in the original Hebrew, Malachim, which literally translates to messengers. Now, you're probably picturing a beautiful person with white wings and a halo floating around playing a harp. That image comes from Renaissance paintings, not from the Bible. The actual biblical text paints something very different. In Genesis 18, 3 angels show up at Abraham's tent, and they look so human that Abraham doesn't even realize they're angels at first. He washes their feet. He cooks them a meal of bread, curds, and a choice calf. They sit down and eat it. They have a full conversation about Sarah having a baby. Abraham treats them like road-weary travelers, not celestial beings. But then those same messengers walk into the city of Sodom in Genesis 19, and the tone shifts completely. An angry mob surrounds the house where they're staying, and the angels respond by striking every single person in the crowd blind. Not 1 or 2 people, the entire mob. Then they grab Lot and his family by the hands and physically drag them out of the city before fire rains from the sky and erases Sodom from the map. These aren't gentle harp players. They go from dinner guests to city-destroying operatives in the span of a few hours. And the detail people always miss about the Malachim is that every single time they appear to humans in the Old Testament, the first thing out of their mouths is, "Do not be afraid." They say it in Genesis. They say it in Judges. They say it in Daniel. They say it in Luke. Over and over. It's practically a catchphrase. Think about that for a second. If they looked like the pretty angels on your grandma's living room painting, why would that be the opening line? You don't walk into a room and say, "Don't be afraid," unless the person you're talking to is visibly terrified. The human disguise is exactly that, a disguise, a way to interact with humans without causing a complete psychological meltdown. Their true appearance is something that triggers a deep, primal fear response, the kind of fear that shuts down rational thought. And we know they predate humans. Job 38 tells us that when God was laying the foundations of the earth, the angels were already there. The text calls them morning stars and says they were singing and shouting for joy as the universe was being built. They watched creation happen. They were the audience. And in 2 Kings 19, a single angel goes out at night and kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one evening. One angel, 185,000 soldiers. By morning, the entire Assyrian army besieging Jerusalem was a field of corpses. The text describes this so casually. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. As if this is just what angels do when God gives the word. But here's the thing. The Malachim are the lowest ranking beings in the heavenly hierarchy. They're the foot soldiers, the messengers, the ones God sends to interact with humans, because they can take a form we can actually survive looking at. The creatures above them make the Malachim look like interns. And the next one on this list holds a rank so high that only 2 beings in the entire Bible carry the title. Above the regular angels, the Bible describes a class of beings that are essentially heaven's commanding officers, the archangels. Now here's where things get interesting. The Protestant Bible only names one archangel, Michael. That's it. Just one confirmed archangel in 66 books. But the Book of Enoch, which the Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers scripture, and which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, names 7. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Sarakiel, Raguel, and Remiel. Whether you accept all 7 or just Michael, what's clear is that the archangels operate on a completely different level than the regular Malachim. These aren't messengers who deliver notes. These are generals who fight wars in dimensions humans can barely perceive. Let's start with Michael. Daniel chapter 10 gives us one of the wildest scenes in the entire Old Testament. Daniel is praying, and an angel shows up and says something like, "I heard your prayer on day 1, but I couldn't get here for 21 days because the Prince of Persia was blocking me." Now, the Prince of Persia here isn't referring to a human king. Scholars widely interpret this as a fallen angel or demonic power controlling the Persian Empire from the spiritual realm. And this angel couldn't get through. He was stuck in a 3-week fight with this being. Until Michael showed up. The text says, "Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me." And suddenly, the blockade was broken. Michael is the one they call when a regular angel can't finish the job. He's the closer, the heavy hitter, the one whose title in Jude 1:9 is literally the archangel. Daniel also says that Michael will stand up during the end times, during a period of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation. When the worst moment in human history arrives, Michael is the one assigned to it. That tells you something about his capability. Then there's Gabriel. Gabriel doesn't fight wars. Gabriel carries information so important that the wrong delivery could alter the entire course of human history. He's essentially the highest clearance courier in existence. Gabriel is the one who explains Daniel's visions about future empires. He's the one who tells the priest Zechariah that he and his wife Elizabeth are going to have a son named John, who will grow up to be John the Baptist. And he's the one who walks into a room in Nazareth and tells a teenage girl named Mary that she's about to conceive the Messiah. But here's the moment that really shows you what Gabriel is. When Zechariah receives this news about having a son, he pushes back. He says, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." Reasonable question, right? Gabriel's response is basically, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now, because you did not believe my words, you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens." And Zechariah walked out of the temple mute. He could not speak a single word for 9 months. He asked for a receipt, and Gabriel took away his ability to talk. That's not a gentle messenger. That's a being with the authority to override human biology because someone questioned the source of his information. "I stand in the presence of God" isn't a humble introduction. It's a credential so high that doubting it comes with immediate consequences. Now, if you accept the Book of Enoch and the broader tradition, the other archangels get even more interesting. Raphael's name means God heals. And in the Book of Tobit, he disguises himself as a human traveler to guide a young man on a dangerous journey, only revealing his true identity at the end. Uriel, whose name means light of God, is traditionally credited with warning Noah about the coming flood. These aren't minor side characters. They're directors of massive cosmic operations. And there's a detail about archangel warfare that people overlook completely. The Book of Revelation describes a war in heaven where Michael and his angels fight against the dragon and its angels. This isn't a metaphor for a disagreement. The Greek word used is polemos, the same word used for full-scale military conflict between nations. Heaven itself became a battlefield. Revelation says the dragon was not strong enough, and the rebel angels lost their place in heaven. Michael didn't just hold the line, he drove them out entirely. When you consider that 1/3 of all angels joined the rebellion, Michael commanded the remaining 2/3 and achieved total victory. That's the kind of general we're talking about. The archangels operate as direct extensions of divine will. They move between dimensions, command armies of lesser angels, wage wars against principalities that influence entire civilizations, and carry announcements that reshape the course of human history. But even they rank below the next creature on this list. And this is where the Bible starts getting genuinely, uncomfortably strange. Because creature number 5 doesn't look like anything you'd expect an intelligent being to look like. It looks like a machine. All right. Forget everything you think you know about what heavenly beings look like, because the Ophanim are where the Bible goes completely off the map of anything we'd consider normal. The prophet Ezekiel describes them in chapter 1 of his book, and the description is so bizarre that scholars have debated for centuries whether Ezekiel was being literal, metaphorical, or whether the Hebrew language simply didn't have words for what he was actually seeing. Here's what he says. He saw wheels, giant spinning wheels. But these weren't chariot wheels. Each wheel existed inside another wheel, intersecting at right angles like a gyroscope. Imagine two hula hoops pushed through each other at 90-degree angles, both spinning independently. That's the starting point. And the rims of these wheels were tall and terrifying, Ezekiel says, and covered in eyes. Not a few eyes. The rims were full of eyes all around, hundreds of them, all open, all watching. A living geometric shape made of intersecting rings covered in eyeballs. The Hebrew word ophan literally means wheel. That's what these beings are. They're wheels, not angels with wheels, not creatures riding wheels. They are the wheels. Geometric shapes that are somehow alive, conscious, seeing in every direction simultaneously, and moving with what Ezekiel describes as perfect coordination. He says wherever the spirit wanted to go, the Ophanim went. They didn't turn. They didn't slow down or change direction like a car makes a turn. They just moved, instantly, in any direction, as if the concept of facing a particular direction simply didn't apply to them. And Ezekiel adds a detail about their appearance that makes the whole thing even more surreal. He says the wheels glowed like chrysolite, which is a yellowish-green gemstone. So picture this. Giant, glowing, golden-green gyroscopes covered in hundreds of unblinking eyes, hovering above the ground without any visible means of support, moving in perfect sync with the cherubim, and producing a sound that Ezekiel compares to the roar of rushing waters or the voice of the Almighty. The book of Daniel adds another layer. In chapter 7, Daniel describes God's throne and says the throne has wheels of blazing fire. Scholars widely believe these are the same Ophanim that Ezekiel saw. They appear to be integrated into the throne of God itself, either as part of its structure or as its locomotion system. Some rabbinical traditions say the Ophanim never stop spinning. Their perpetual rotation is what generates the energy that sustains the heavenly realm. Other traditions interpret the eyes as an expression of God's omniscience, the idea that absolutely nothing in all of creation goes unseen. The eyes don't sleep, they don't blink. They watch everything, everywhere, all at once. And here's something that a lot of people in the comments are going to bring up, so let me address it directly. Yes, the Ophanim look a lot like how science fiction describes alien spacecraft. The gyroscopic movement, the hovering, the brilliant light. Some people have argued that Ezekiel was describing a UFO encounter and that ancient Hebrew prophets were actually witnessing advanced technology they had no framework to understand. Whether you believe that interpretation or not, what's undeniable is that the Ophanim don't fit any conventional image of angels, demons, or any spiritual being in any religious tradition. They're genuinely one of the strangest things described in any ancient text, religious or otherwise. The medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides actually ranked the Ophanim second in the angelic hierarchy, just below the Chayot HaKodesh, the holy living creatures, which he considered the highest. Other Jewish traditions place them third. Christian theology generally folds them into the broader category of thrones, one of the 9 choirs of angels described by the 5th century theologian Pseudo-Dionysius. But regardless of where you rank them, their function seems clear. They are the mobility system of God's throne, the living machinery that allows God's presence to move through creation. And the fact that God's throne needs a transportation system at all raises a question that theologians have wrestled with for centuries. If God is omnipresent, everywhere at once, why does his throne need wheels? The answer most scholars land on is that the Ophanim don't represent God moving. They represent God's concentrated, localized presence moving, the specific point in space where God's glory is most visible, most intense, most overwhelming. And when that presence moves through creation, reality itself bends around it. But living wheels covered in eyes aren't even the strangest thing Ezekiel saw that day. Because moving in perfect sync with the Ophanim, fused to them in a way that Ezekiel struggles to put into words, were the creatures he initially calls the living creatures. It took him until chapter 10 to realize what he was actually looking at. And when he did, the name hit him like a brick, because these weren't unknown beings. They were cherubim, the same creatures described in Genesis, in Exodus, in the Psalms, except nothing in those earlier books prepared him for what they actually looked like up close. If the Ophanim shattered your expectations, the cherubim are about to demolish whatever's left, because the gap between what the Bible actually says about cherubim and what popular culture turned them into might be the single biggest rebrand in the history of Western civilization. Those cute, chubby babies with tiny wings on Valentine's Day cards. Those are called putti. They come from Roman art. They have absolutely nothing to do with the biblical cherubim. The real cherubim are war machines. Here's what Ezekiel describes in chapters 1 and 10. Each cherub has 4 faces. One face of a human looking forward, one face of a lion to the right, one face of an ox to the left, and one face of an eagle at the back. 4 faces on a single head, looking in all 4 directions at once. They have 4 wings. 2 wings stretch upward and touch the wings of the cherubim next to them, forming a kind of canopy. 2 wings cover their bodies below, and underneath the wings, Ezekiel says, are human hands. 4 human hands, one under each wing. Their legs are straight, with no knees, no joints. The soles of their feet look like the hooves of a calf, and they gleam like polished bronze. They don't walk the way we walk. They move like lightning, darting in any direction without turning their bodies. Because they have a face pointing in every direction, they never need to turn. They just go. And between the cherubim, Ezekiel says, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving back and forth. The fire was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. So you have these 4-faced, bronze-hooved, 4-winged creatures moving like lightning, with literal fire and lightning flickering between them. Now here's why the cherubim matter beyond just looking terrifying. They're guards. That's their job. And the things they guard are the most sacred objects and places in the entire biblical narrative. In Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and are expelled from Eden, God stations cherubim at the garden's east entrance, and he gives them a flaming sword that turns in every direction to guard the path to the tree of life. Not a locked gate, not a wall. Living, 4-faced warrior creatures with a weapon made of rotating fire. Think about what that implies about the tree of life. It must be extraordinarily important, maybe the most important physical object in all of creation, if God designed that level of security for it. He didn't just hide it. He made it impossible to reach. The cherubim also appear on the Ark of the Covenant. Exodus 25 describes 2 golden cherubim facing each other on top of the mercy seat, with their wings stretched out to cover it. And God tells Moses something remarkable. He says, "There, above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the Ark of the Covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites." The space between the cherubim's wings is the exact spot where God's voice manifests on earth. That tiny gap is the interface between the creator of the universe and the physical world. And the cherubim are the frame around it. Psalm 18 takes it even further. It says, God mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. Ezekiel saw them carrying God's throne through the sky. They're not just guards, they're throne bearers. They're the chariot that carries the presence of God wherever it goes. The ancient cultures surrounding Israel had remarkably similar composite creatures. The Assyrians had the lamassu, massive winged bulls with human heads that guarded palace entrances. The Egyptians had sphinxes. The Babylonians had similar guardian figures. Some scholars believe the cherubim represent the original concept that all of these cultural echoes descended from. And there's another dimension to the cherubim that scholars love to debate. The 4 faces have been interpreted as representing the 4 pillars of created life. The lion is the king of wild animals. The ox is the strongest of domesticated animals. The eagle rules the sky. And the human face represents earthly intelligence. Each cherub carries a representative from every category of life, as if the entire created world is compressed into a single guardian form. Early Christian tradition actually mapped these 4 faces onto the 4 Gospels. Matthew is the human, Mark is the lion, Luke is the ox, and John is the eagle. Whether that connection is intentional or coincidental, it shows how deeply the cherubim imagery embedded itself into the foundation of Western religious thought. You can find them in cathedral art, medieval manuscripts, and church architecture across the entire world. They've been watching over humanity's sacred spaces for thousands of years, but we're only at number 4. And the creature above the cherubim in the heavenly hierarchy does something that none of the others do. It doesn't guard. It doesn't carry. It doesn't watch. It screams. And it has never stopped. The word seraph in Hebrew comes from the root saraph, which means to burn. These are literally the burning ones, and the only detailed description of them in the entire Bible comes from a single chapter, Isaiah 6. Isaiah describes a vision where he sees God sitting on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe fills the entire temple, not just drapes over the throne, fills the entire building. That's how massive this vision is. And hovering above the throne in the air are the seraphim. Each one has 6 wings. 2 wings cover their face, 2 wings cover their feet, and 2 wings are used for flying. That's already bizarre, but think about what it means. These beings exist in the direct presence of God, closer to Him than almost anything else in creation, and they cover their own eyes. They shield their own faces from what they're standing next to. That tells you something about the intensity of God's presence in its unfiltered form. Whatever God actually looks like, it's too much even for the seraphim. The creatures literally made of fire still have to look away. The feet are covered too, which in ancient Hebrew culture was a sign of deep reverence and humility. So the seraphim, beings infinitely more terrifying than anything on earth, approach God with a level of humility that suggests the gap between them and God is vast beyond comprehension. They're not His equals, they're not His peers, they're His attendants, and they know it. But here's the detail that defines the seraphim more than anything else. Isaiah says they call out to each other back and forth without ceasing, the same words over and over. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And when they speak, Isaiah says the doorposts and thresholds of the temple shake, and the entire building fills with smoke.
39.
Their voices physically destabilize architecture. The sound they produce is described the way you'd describe an earthquake or a bomb going off. The Book of Revelation, chapter 4, picks up this exact same image and takes it further. John describes creatures around God's throne who, day and night, never stop saying the same declaration. Never. They've been saying these words since before the earth existed. And according to the text, they haven't paused once, not for a second. Try to wrap your mind around that. Beings made of fire with 6 wings, covering their own faces because even they can't handle God's full presence, have been crying out the same 3 words on loop for longer than time has existed, and their voices shake buildings. Then comes the moment that makes Isaiah 6 one of the most dramatic scenes in the Old Testament. Isaiah realizes where he is and what he's seeing, and he completely panics. He says, "Woe to me, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." He thinks he's about to die. In the Old Testament, the common belief was that seeing God meant death, and in that moment, one of the seraphim flies to him. It's holding a live coal that it picked up from the altar with tongs. Even the seraphim, beings literally made of fire, use tongs to handle this coal. Think about how hot something has to be for a creature that is fire to need a tool to pick it up. The seraph presses this coal against Isaiah's lips and says, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." A creature made of fire cauterizes a man's mouth to purify him so he can survive standing in God's presence. That's not a bedtime story. That's a medical procedure performed by a supernatural being. And there's one more layer to the seraphim that scholars argue about constantly. In Numbers 21, when the Israelites are wandering the desert and complaining, God sends fiery serpents among them that bite and kill people. The Hebrew word used for those serpents is seraphim. Same word, same root. This has led some scholars to argue that the seraphim might not be the humanoid winged figures we imagine, but might actually have a serpentine appearance. Winged fire serpents, hovering around God's throne, screaming holy forever. Whether serpentine or humanoid, the seraphim are the highest-ranking beings described in regular worship around God's throne. They exist at the absolute edge of created reality, the boundary line between what was made and the one who made it. And there's one more implication to the seraphim that deserves attention. Their unceasing worship isn't just a ritual. Jewish and Christian scholars both point out that the triple repetition of holy is unique in the Bible. Hebrew doesn't have superlatives the way English does. You can't say holiest in ancient Hebrew. Instead, you repeat a word to intensify it. Saying something once means it's true. Saying it twice means it's very true. Saying it 3 times means it's the ultimate expression of that quality. Holy, holy, holy is the Hebrew equivalent of saying, this is the most holy thing that could possibly exist. And the seraphim say it on an infinite loop. The very fabric of heaven vibrates with that declaration. But even the seraphim, burning and screaming and shaking temples, are not the most remarkable creature on this list. Because creature number 2 involves a being whose story might be the most tragic in the entire Bible. It's the story of perfection turned inside out. Every creature on this list so far is terrifying, bizarre, and completely alien to human understanding. But creature number 2 is different. This one was beautiful, not just attractive, not just impressive. The text says this being was the most exquisitely designed thing God ever produced. Ezekiel chapter 28 starts as a message to the human king of Tyre. But somewhere around verse 12, the language shifts dramatically. The descriptions stop making sense for any human being. And scholars have debated for millennia whether the text pivots here to describe a supernatural being that the king of Tyre was unknowingly mirroring. Here's what the text says. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Already this can't be a human. No human king was in Eden. Then comes the list. Every precious stone adorned you. Sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald. And gold was prepared for you on the day you were created. 9 stones, each one embedded in this being's form, not worn like jewelry, built into its very body, with settings and mountings of gold that were designed at the moment of its creation. And then a detail that most people completely miss. The passage says, timbrels and pipes were prepared inside this creature on the day it was made. Musical instruments built into its being. This creature didn't play music. It was music. Sound was woven into its existence, part of its fundamental design. Ezekiel calls this being the anointed cherub who covers. That word, covers, is the same Hebrew word used for the cherubim whose wings cover the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. This was the cherub whose wings were spread over the very throne of God, the single closest created being to the Creator in all of existence. The text says this being walked among the stones of fire on the holy mountain of God. It was blameless in all its ways from the day it was created, until wickedness was found in you. Ezekiel says, your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. This being looked at itself. It saw the gemstones, heard the music flowing from its own body, felt the weight of its own perfection, and something broke inside it. It decided that being the greatest creation wasn't enough. It wanted to be the Creator. Isaiah 14 gives us the internal monologue. 5 declarations that read like a manifesto. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. 5 times I will. Not I wish or I hope. 5 statements of absolute intent from the most magnificent creature in existence, declaring war against the one who built it. Revelation 12 tells us the aftermath. This being didn't go alone. It swept a third of the stars of heaven, which scholars widely interpret as a third of the angels. A third of all angelic beings chose to follow the covering cherub's rebellion. This wasn't a minor disagreement. This was a cosmic civil war. The result, according to Ezekiel, is that God threw this being to the earth. Isaiah says it was cast down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Jesus in Luke 10:18 says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." The covering cherub became the adversary. Ha-Satan in Hebrew, the most beautiful, wisest, most musically gifted thing God ever made, became the personification of everything that opposes God's design. And the tragedy that the text emphasizes isn't the rebellion itself, it's what was lost. This creature had everything: absolute beauty, perfect wisdom, direct access to the Creator, music flowing from its body, the highest position any created being could hold. And it traded all of it because it wanted the one thing it couldn't have: to be God. And here's what makes this story hit even harder. The fall of the covering cherub wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the event that broke the universe. Christian theology traces the origin of evil, suffering, death, disease, all of it, back to this moment. One creature's pride didn't just destroy itself. It introduced corruption into the entire fabric of reality. Every war, every famine, every cancer diagnosis, every act of cruelty, all of it traces a line back to the moment the most perfect creature in existence looked at itself and decided perfection wasn't enough. And the really uncomfortable implication, if the most beautiful, most wise, most privileged being in all of creation could fall, what does that say about the rest of us? The covering cherub is a warning written into the architecture of the universe. Pride can corrupt anything, even perfection, but there's still one more creature on this list, and it's the strangest one of all. Because unlike every other being we've talked about, this creature doesn't live in heaven, it lives in the ocean. And God himself describes it to Job with what sounds like genuine pride. Even God seems impressed by this thing. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? That's God talking, directly to Job. And he's not asking because he wants an answer. He's asking because he already knows the answer is no. Every creature on this list so far exists in the spiritual realm, around God's throne, in heaven. But Leviathan is different. Leviathan was placed in the physical world, in our world. And the description of it in Job chapters 40 and 41 is the longest description of any single creature in the entire Bible. God spends more verses describing Leviathan than he does describing the creation of humans. And the context matters. Job has been suffering, questioning God, asking why terrible things happen to good people. And God's response is essentially, "You want to question me? Let me tell you about something I made, and then let's see if you still feel qualified to have opinions about how I run the universe." God asks Job, "Will Leviathan beg you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave forever?" He's mocking Job. Can you domesticate this thing? Can you put it on a leash? Can you make it your pet? Obviously not. Then God starts describing what Leviathan actually is, and the description goes on for 34 verses. Its back has rows of shields so tightly sealed that no air can pass between them. When it sneezes, light flashes out. Its eyes glow like the rays of dawn. Firebrands come from its mouth. Sparks shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils like steam from a boiling cauldron. Its breath sets coals on fire, and flames dart from its mouth. Its neck is enormous and powerful. Its chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it raises itself up, even the mighty are terrified and retreat before its thrashing. If you strike it with a sword, the sword does nothing. Spears, darts, javelins, all useless. It treats iron like straw. It treats bronze like rotten wood. Arrows don't make it flinch. Stones from slings are like chaff. And then God says something that elevates Leviathan above everything else. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty. It is king over all that are proud. King over all that are proud. That specific line has led scholars down a rabbit hole connecting Leviathan to the covering cherub, since pride was the defining sin of the fallen angel. Psalm 74 says God broke the heads of Leviathan. Isaiah 27 says that in the last days God will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Is Leviathan a real physical creature, a crocodile that ancient people exaggerated, a dinosaur, a symbolic representation of primordial chaos that God conquered when he created the universe? Scholars disagree intensely. The crocodile theory is the most common naturalistic explanation, but crocodiles don't breathe fire. They don't have armor that deflects swords, and God doesn't describe crocodiles like they're the greatest thing he ever built. The chaos monster theory is popular in academic circles. Ancient Mesopotamian creation myths describe a primordial sea dragon called Tiamat that the gods had to defeat before creating the world. Some scholars argue Leviathan is Israel's version of that same myth, representing the forces of chaos and disorder that God defeated or contained when he shaped the cosmos. Under this reading, Leviathan isn't a specific animal. It's a theological concept wrapped in monster imagery. But other scholars push back hard on that interpretation. They point out that God describes Leviathan with physical specificity, with anatomical details about its skin, its mouth, its chest, its movement through water. If this were pure symbolism, why describe it like an animal? And why does God sound genuinely proud of it? The point God makes to Job is devastating in its simplicity. You can't even handle what I put in the water. You can't catch it, tame it, fight it, or survive an encounter with it. And you think you're qualified to question the decisions of the being who made this thing for fun? That's Leviathan, the creature so impressive that God uses it to end an argument. And by the way, Leviathan isn't even the only pre-human creature described in those chapters. God also describes Behemoth in Job 40, a land creature with a tail like a cedar tree, bones like tubes of bronze, and limbs like bars of iron. God says Behemoth is the first of his works, and that only its maker can approach it with a sword. Some scholars think this is a hippo. Others argue it's a description of a sauropod dinosaur. Whatever it is, God calls it the first of his creations, which places it firmly before humans in the order of existence. Between Leviathan in the sea and Behemoth on the land, the Bible paints a picture of a physical world that was populated by creatures of staggering scale before humans ever showed up. We weren't the first tenants. We might not even have been the most impressive ones. 7 creatures, all made before humans existed. Some guard God's throne, some carry it, some burn with fire just by existing. One was so perfect that it started a war in heaven, and one breathes fire in the deepest part of the ocean. Before Adam, before Eve, before a single human being drew breath, the heavens were already full, and the beings that filled them weren't gentle. They were covered in eyes, wrapped in fire, armed with swords, and shaking the foundations of reality every time they opened their mouths. The Bible spends more time describing these beings than it does describing what heaven actually looks like, and yet almost none of this gets talked about in church. You have to dig for it. Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1 and 10, Job 41, Revelation 4. The passages are right there, in plain text, waiting for someone to actually read them. If you want to go deeper into the stories the Bible tells that nobody talks about, that video is on screen right now. Subscribe if you made it this far. I'll see you in the next one.
लावा भर देते अभी। ये अंडा अभी पानी भरना बाकी है। Whoa. To bring for whenever we can.
Before time began, a question was forged into a name that would become the greatest threat to darkness itself. Who is like God? Not a question seeking an answer, but a declaration of war. In the throne room of the Almighty, one angel stands above all others, wielding power that makes demons flee and nations rise or fall by his command. He casts down the dragon. He guards the souls of the righteous. He holds back the final unleashing of evil upon this world. The prophecies speak of him. Daniel saw him standing in visions of the end times. John witnessed him in the apocalypse, commanding armies of light. His sword has been drawn since before Eden, and it will strike its final blow when the seals are broken and the trumpets sound. Satan knows his name and trembles. The Antichrist will face his wrath. Every demon in hell has felt his fury, yet most of humanity remains blind to the invisible war he wages over our very souls at this moment. His story is not just history, it's prophecy unfolding. The ancient texts reveal that his greatest battle is still to come. Are you ready to discover the truth about Michael, the archangel whose next move could change everything? There are names that carry weight. Names that tell stories before a single word is spoken, and then there are names that stand as declarations of truth itself. Michael is one of these names. In the original Hebrew language, the name Michael is written as Mikael. Break it down, and you find three simple parts that form one powerful question: who is like God? But this isn't someone asking because they don't know the answer. This is a question thrown like a spear into the face of pride itself. The answer rings clear through every corner of heaven and earth. No one, absolutely no one, compares to God. Think about what it means to carry such a name. Every time this angel is called, every time his name is spoken, it's a reminder of God's supreme authority. It's a battle cry. It's a statement that cuts through any claim of equality with the Creator. In the realm where beings of immense power exist, where angels shine with glory that would blind human eyes, this name stands as the ultimate truth. God alone is God, and nothing in all creation can stand beside him. When rebellion threatened heaven itself, when pride tried to climb to God's throne, this name became more than identity. It became purpose. Who is like God? The question Michael carries isn't just what he's called, it's who he is. It's why he fights. It's the core of everything he stands for in the cosmic order. Heaven operates with order, perfect divine order. And within that structure, Michael holds a position that sets him apart from all other angels. The book of Daniel gives us a glimpse into this hierarchy. In chapter 10, verse 13, we find something remarkable. Daniel had been praying and fasting for 3 weeks, seeking understanding. When an angel finally appeared to him, this heavenly messenger explained why he'd been delayed. He said, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia." Notice those words. One of the chief princes.
In the vast angelic host, in the countless numbers of heavenly beings, Michael stands among the highest ranks. He's not just an angel. He's not even just an archangel. He's a chief prince, a commander, someone who leads other leaders. Later in that same book, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, the angel speaking to Daniel says something even more specific. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands, watch over the sons of your people. The great prince, not just a prince, but the great one. This shows us that even among the chief princes, Michael holds special prominence. The word archangel itself means chief angel or ruling angel. And while Scripture speaks of other powerful angels like Gabriel and Raphael in tradition, when it comes to military command, to leading heaven's armies, to standing as the supreme defender, that role belongs to Michael. He commands legions. He directs battles in realms we cannot see. His authority comes directly from God's throne, and every angel under his command knows that when Michael speaks, he speaks with the full weight of divine authority behind him. God chose a people. From among all the nations of earth, he called Abraham and made promises that would echo through generations. And for this chosen nation, God appointed a guardian, unlike any earthly protector. Michael's special assignment connects directly to Israel. This isn't a casual connection or a temporary duty. It's a covenant responsibility that stretches across time itself. We see this clearly in Daniel chapter 10, verse 21, where the heavenly messenger tells Daniel, "But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these, except Michael, your prince." Your prince, not just any prince, but specifically assigned to Daniel's people, to Israel. The angel speaking to Daniel makes it personal, direct. Michael belongs to them as their defender. Then, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, this role becomes even clearer. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was, since there was a nation even to that time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Michael stands watch. That's his position. Like a sentinel who never sleeps, never abandons his post, never turns away even for a moment. He watches over the sons of Israel with a dedication that spans millennia. When they faced slavery in Egypt, Michael was there in the unseen realm. When they wandered in the wilderness, he guarded them. When they entered the promised land, he fought battles in heavenly places that made their earthly victories possible. This protection isn't about borders or buildings. It's about preserving God's plan. Through Israel would come the Messiah. Through this nation, God would reveal himself to the world. And Michael's assignment was to ensure that no spiritual force, no matter how powerful, could destroy that divine purpose. He stands between Israel and the forces of darkness that would love nothing more than to wipe God's chosen people from existence. War exists beyond what human eyes can see. Battles rage in dimensions where flesh and blood cannot enter. And in these cosmic conflicts, Michael holds the highest military command under God himself. This isn't symbolic warfare. This isn't metaphor. The book of Revelation pulls back the curtain on a reality that most people never consider. In chapter 12, verses 7 through 9, we read, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." War broke out in heaven. Let that sink in. The perfect realm, the holy dwelling place of God, became a battlefield. And when it did, Michael commanded the loyal forces. He didn't ask for the position. He didn't campaign for leadership. God appointed him as the supreme military commander of the heavenly host, and he fulfilled that role with devastating effectiveness. Michael leads angels in combat. He strategizes. He directs assaults against enemy positions. He coordinates defense and offense simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality. When demons gather to attack, when Satan marshals his fallen angels for an assault, Michael stands as the immovable wall that breaks their advance. His warfare isn't limited to one great battle in the past. Right now, at this very moment, spiritual battles rage. Principalities and powers clash over nations, over churches, over individual souls. And Michael remains at the command post, directing angelic forces with the precision of perfect wisdom and the power of heaven's might behind every order he gives. The book of Jude, in verse 9, gives us another glimpse. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Even in direct confrontation with Satan himself, Michael operates with authority and purpose. He doesn't need to rely on insults or personal power. He wields something far greater, the authority of God's name. Proximity to power matters. In earthly kingdoms, those who stand closest to the king hold influence and authority that others can only dream of. In heaven's kingdom, this principle exists in perfect form. Michael doesn't serve from a distance. He doesn't receive orders through intermediaries. He stands in the direct presence of God Almighty, positioned where he can hear the divine voice without any barrier or delay. The Book of Tobit, recognized in some Christian traditions, mentions 7 angels who stand before God's glory. While this book isn't in all biblical canons, the concept aligns with other scripture. In Revelation chapter 8, verse 2, we read, "And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets." These aren't ordinary angels waiting in an outer court. These are beings who have access to the throne room itself, who exist in that consuming fire of God's presence. Michael holds this position not as a reward, but as a responsibility. Standing before God means being ready for immediate deployment. It means hearing divine commands the moment they're spoken. It means existing in that space where holiness burns so intensely that nothing impure could survive even an instant. Think about what this means practically. When God decides to act, when the Almighty chooses to intervene in human affairs or in the cosmic struggle between good and evil, Michael is right there to receive the order. There's no delay, no message passed through channels, direct communication from the throne to the commander. This proximity also shapes Michael's character. You cannot stand in God's presence day after day, age after age, without being transformed by that glory. The angels who serve closest to God reflect his nature most clearly. They burn with his holiness. They act with his justice. They love with his love. Michael's long service in this sacred position has refined him into the perfect instrument of God's will. In Daniel chapter 10, verse 13, when the angel explains to Daniel about the spiritual battle that delayed his arrival, he mentions that Michael came to help. This wasn't Michael wandering by and deciding to assist. This was Michael being dispatched from God's presence on a specific mission. He left the throne room, descended into the realm of spiritual warfare, and accomplished exactly what God required. Heaven's hierarchy isn't about competition, it's about perfect cooperation. Each angel, each archangel, serves according to divine assignment. And Michael's relationships with his fellow archangels reveal how heaven operates. Gabriel stands as heaven's primary messenger. When God wants to communicate something crucial to humanity, Gabriel often carries that message. We see him announcing the coming birth of John the Baptist to Zechariah in Luke chapter 1. We see him appearing to Mary to announce that she would bear the Messiah. Gabriel specializes in revelation. in delivering divine words to human ears. Michael's role differs completely. Where Gabriel speaks, Michael fights. Where Gabriel announces, Michael defends. There's no rivalry here, no jealousy about who does what. Each archangel operates in their sphere of authority with perfect unity of purpose. In Daniel chapter 10, we see this cooperation in action. The angel speaking to Daniel explains that he was opposed by the prince of Persia, a demonic power, for 21 days. Then he says in verse 13, "But behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me." Michael didn't wait for a formal request. He didn't question whether this was his job. He came to help a fellow angel who was locked in spiritual combat. This shows us something profound about Michael's character. Despite his supreme military authority, despite being the great prince, he doesn't stand on ceremony. When another servant of God needs backup, Michael provides it. The mission matters more than position. God's purposes take priority over any protocol. Traditional Christian teaching speaks of Raphael as an archangel associated with healing and guidance. While the Bible mentions Raphael primarily in books not included in all canons, the pattern remains consistent. Different archangels, different functions, all serving the same God with perfect coordination. Michael's relationship with these other archangels operates like a perfectly trained military alongside specialized divisions. He commands the combat forces, but he respects and works with those who handle intelligence, communication, and other essential functions. When Gabriel delivers a message that requires protection, Michael ensures no demonic force interferes. When a healing mission needs security, Michael's angels stand guard. This isn't democracy in heaven. God commands all. But within that structure, Michael leads the military operations while maintaining seamless cooperation with every other part of heaven's administration. He never oversteps his authority. He never undermines another angel's assignment. He serves where God places him and works with whoever God assigns alongside him. Sleep doesn't exist in heaven. Fatigue is a human limitation. Angels don't need rest, don't require breaks, don't experience the exhaustion that forces humans to stop and recover. And Michael embodies this tireless vigilance more than perhaps any other created being. His watchfulness never wavers, not for a second, not for a millennium. From the moment God assigned him as guardian and commander, Michael has maintained constant awareness of every threat, every movement of enemy forces, every shadow of danger that approaches anything under his protection. Daniel chapter 12 verse 1 describes him this way: "The great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people." The phrase "stands watch" carries weight. It's not casual observation. It's active, intense, focused attention. A watchman on a city wall scans the horizon constantly, looking for any sign of approaching danger. Michael does this on a cosmic scale. Think about what this means for Israel throughout history. Every persecution, every attempt at genocide, every plot to destroy God's chosen people has faced Michael's opposition. He sees these threats before they fully form. He recognizes patterns in the spiritual realm that predict physical attacks, and he acts to counter them, sometimes in ways visible to humans, more often in battles fought entirely in dimensions we cannot perceive. This vigilance extends beyond just Israel. As commander of God's armies, Michael monitors all spiritual warfare everywhere. When a demon attacks a believer in Asia, Michael knows. When principalities gather over a nation in Africa, Michael sees. When Satan himself schemes against God's plans, Michael stands ready to execute whatever defensive or offensive operations God commands. He never relaxes. He never assumes the battle is won and lets his guard down. He never thinks, things are quiet now, I can take a break. Evil never rests, never stops looking for openings, never ceases trying to advance its agenda. and Michael matches that relentless opposition with equally relentless defense. The Bible doesn't record Michael asking for relief. We never see him requesting a replacement so he can step away. His eternal vigilance flows from his nature and his devotion to God's purposes. He was made for this, created for exactly this kind of unending watchfulness. And he fulfills this role with a dedication that never diminishes across the endless ages. Scripture doesn't waste words. When the Bible mentions someone repeatedly across different books, written by different authors, separated by centuries, that tells us something. Michael appears throughout the sacred texts, and each mention adds another layer to our understanding of who he is. The book of Daniel introduces us to Michael more than any other biblical text. 3 times Daniel's visions include direct references to this archangel. In Daniel chapter 10, verses 13 and 21, we learn about Michael's role in spiritual warfare and his assignment to Israel. Then Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, presents him as the great prince who will stand up during the time of unprecedented trouble. These aren't random mentions. Daniel was receiving prophecies about the future, about events that would unfold across centuries and millennia. And in these visions of times to come, Michael appears as a constant factor. He's there in the spiritual battles of Daniel's own time. He's there in the prophecies about future conflicts. His presence threads through the entire prophetic timeline. The book of Jude gives us one of the most intriguing glimpses of Michael in the entire Bible. Verse 9 states, "Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" This single verse reveals multiple aspects of Michael's character. It shows his direct confrontation with Satan. It reveals his restraint and his reliance on God's authority rather than his own power. It demonstrates wisdom in spiritual warfare. Then we come to the book of Revelation. Chapter 12 gives us the most dramatic account of Michael in all of Scripture. Verses 7 through 9 describe war in heaven, with Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon and his angels. This passage takes us from heaven's timeline into cosmic events that shake all creation. Michael isn't just defending, he's actively casting out the accuser, driving Satan from heaven itself. Notice how these texts span different types of biblical literature. Daniel is prophecy, Jude is a letter, Revelation is apocalyptic vision. Yet Michael appears consistently across all these genres. Whether the text is explaining past events, addressing current issues, or revealing future realities, Michael remains relevant. His role doesn't change based on which human author is writing or what century the words are recorded in. The consistency of his portrayal matters. Every biblical mention shows Michael as powerful, loyal, and focused on protecting God's people and executing God's will. There's no contradiction, no confusion, no alternate version where Michael serves a different purpose. The Bible presents a unified picture of this archangel across every text that mentions him. Even in the way he's described, there's a pattern. He's always the archangel or the great prince. Never just an angel, never a minor figure. Scripture treats him with a respect that acknowledges his unique position in the heavenly hierarchy. The texts don't explain everything about Michael. They don't tell us when he was created or detail every battle he's fought. But what they do tell us is consistent, clear, and significant enough that God ensured these accounts were preserved in his written word for humanity. Paradise knew conflict. The place of perfect light, where God's glory shines without shadow, became a battlefield. This wasn't a war that developed gradually. It erupted suddenly, violently, when one of heaven's most magnificent beings decided that serving God wasn't enough. Lucifer had been created with beauty beyond measure. He held a high position among the angels, but somewhere in his heart, pride took root. He looked at God's throne and wanted it for himself. He looked at the worship flowing toward the Creator and decided he deserved it instead. Revelation chapter 12 gives us the account of what happened next. Verse 7 tells us, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought." War broke out. These three words shatter any notion that heaven has always been peaceful. The dragon, which verse 9 identifies as that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, didn't fight alone. He had convinced other angels to join his rebellion. A third of heaven's host, according to the vision, followed him in his attempt to overthrow God's rule. Michael faced an enemy he had once served alongside. These weren't strangers meeting in combat. These were former brothers in service, former companions in worship. But when Lucifer raised his banner of rebellion, when he gathered angels to his cause and declared war against the Most High, Michael didn't hesitate. He didn't try to negotiate. He didn't form a committee to study the situation. He gathered the loyal angels and led them into battle. The scale of this conflict staggers the imagination. Angels of immense power clashing in the throne room of heaven itself. Light against light. Glory against corrupted glory. The rebellion had to be crushed completely, and Michael was the instrument God chose to accomplish it. This wasn't a close fight. The rebel angels had numbers, but they didn't have righteousness. They had Lucifer's charisma and lies, but they didn't have truth. They had rage and pride, but they didn't have God's approval. Verse 8 makes the outcome clear. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Michael's victory was total. He didn't just defeat the rebels, he expelled them, drove them out, made sure that no trace of their rebellion could remain in God's holy dwelling place. The war in heaven had a decisive winner, and Michael stood at the head of the victorious army. Defeating an enemy is one thing, removing them from the battlefield entirely is another. Michael didn't settle for winning battles. He executed complete victory. Revelation chapter 12 verse 9 describes what Michael accomplished. "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." The word cast carries force. This wasn't a gentle escort to the door. This wasn't Satan leaving voluntarily after his defeat. Michael threw him out, hurled him from heaven with such power that there could be no mistaking the finality of his exile. Satan, the accuser, the one who had walked in heaven's courts with authority, found himself plummeting toward earth. The angel who had been created with such beauty and wisdom, who had stood in God's presence, was now falling like lightning from the sky. His place in heaven was gone forever. The access he once had to the throne room was permanently revoked. His angels fell with him. Every demon that exists, every evil spirit that torments humanity, every dark power that works against God's purposes, all of them were cast down in this singular moment of judgment. Michael's sword, God's authority flowing through him, accomplished what needed to be done. Heaven was cleansed of rebellion. The Bible tells us in verse 10 what happened after this expulsion. "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down.'" A loud voice announced it. Victory wasn't hidden or quiet. All of heaven celebrated what Michael had accomplished. The accuser was gone. The one who had stood before God, pointing out every failure, every sin, every weakness of God's people, he couldn't do that anymore. Michael had ended that chapter of cosmic history with decisive action. Satan's fall changed everything. He went from being in heaven to being confined to earth. He went from having access to God's throne to being locked out forever. He went from being an angel of light to being the prince of darkness. And Michael was the one who made it happen. wielding the authority and power of heaven to execute God's judgment on rebellion. Some battles don't involve armies. Some confrontations happen in shadows, away from crowds, with no witnesses except the participants. The dispute over Moses' body was one of these hidden conflicts. The book of Jude gives us this account in verse 9. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Moses had died. Deuteronomy chapter 34 tells us that God himself buried Moses in a valley in the land of Moab, and no one knows where his grave is to this day. But between Moses' death and his burial, something happened that most people never knew about. Satan showed up, and he wanted Moses' body. We don't know exactly why Satan wanted it. Maybe he planned to use it as an object of worship, to lead Israel into idolatry. Maybe he wanted to parade it as a trophy to mock God's servant. Whatever his reason, he appeared and disputed with Michael about it. Michael could have destroyed Satan in that moment. He had the power. He had already cast this fallen angel from heaven. But notice what Michael did instead. He didn't rely on his own strength. He didn't use insults or accusations. He didn't even argue with Satan about who had more right to Moses' body. Michael simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." 5 words. That's all it took. Michael appealed to a higher authority. He called on God's name to settle the dispute. This reveals something crucial about how Michael operates. Even though he's the supreme commander of heaven's armies, even though he has power that would make Satan tremble, he doesn't act independently. He doesn't rely on his own might. He invokes the name and authority of God. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened next in that confrontation, but we know the outcome. Moses was buried by God, not desecrated by Satan. Michael accomplished his mission. He protected God's servant even in death. And he did it not through his own power alone, but by speaking God's rebuke over the enemy. This battle teaches us that not every victory requires overwhelming force. Sometimes the greatest power is knowing when to step back and let God's authority speak for itself. Daniel prayed. He fasted. He sought understanding from God about visions that troubled him, and in the spiritual realm, invisible to human eyes, a war was being fought over whether Daniel would receive the answer he needed. Daniel chapter 10 describes what happened. An angel appeared to Daniel, glorious and terrifying. Daniel fell on his face before this messenger. Then the angel explained why he had taken so long to arrive. Verse 12 begins the explanation. Then he said to me, "Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words." God heard Daniel's prayer immediately. The angel was dispatched right away. But then something extraordinary happened. Verse 13 continues, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia." A spiritual power called the Prince of Persia blocked the angel's path. For 3 full weeks, this demonic force prevented God's messenger from reaching Daniel. This wasn't a minor obstacle. This was a powerful being, strong enough to hold off an angel sent from God's presence. The battle raged in dimensions humans cannot see. While Daniel prayed and fasted in the physical world, completely unaware, a cosmic struggle determined whether he would receive revelation. The Prince of Persia fought to keep Daniel in darkness. The angel fought to deliver God's message. Neither could gain the advantage. Then Michael arrived. The angel told Daniel, "Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me." Michael didn't need to be asked. He saw what was happening and entered the fight. With Michael joining the battle, the deadlock broke. The Prince of Persia couldn't stand against both angels. Michael's presence changed everything. But Michael didn't just fight and leave. Verse 21 tells us more. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. After helping the angel break through to Daniel, Michael stayed. He continued to provide support, to stand against the opposition, to ensure that God's purposes for Daniel could move forward without further interference. Later, the angel says in chapter 10, verse 20, "And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come." Even after Michael's intervention, the battle continued. But Michael remained engaged, working to push back these territorial spirits that tried to prevent God's revelation from reaching his people. Israel's history reads like an endless story of survival against impossible odds. Empires rose determined to wipe them out. Armies attacked from every direction. Persecution followed them through centuries. Yet somehow, impossibly, they endured. What most historians don't recognize is the unseen protector who made that survival possible. Michael fought for them when they couldn't fight for themselves. Every plot to destroy God's chosen people, every scheme to eliminate the line through which the Messiah would come, every attempt to stop God's plan from unfolding, Michael stood against them all. When Pharaoh ordered every Hebrew baby boy to be drowned in the Nile, when Haman schemed to exterminate all Jews in Persia, when Herod slaughtered the infants of Bethlehem, spiritual forces drove these physical attacks. Demons worked through human rulers to accomplish what Satan wanted, the end of God's covenant people. And every time, Michael was there in the unseen realm, fighting battles that made physical deliverance possible. The Bible hints at these conflicts throughout its pages. When Israel faced enemies with superior armies, when they were surrounded with no escape, when extinction seemed certain, something always happened. Help arrived. The enemy made a fatal mistake. Circumstances shifted in impossible ways. People called it luck or coincidence. But behind every miraculous deliverance, Michael waged war against principalities and powers that sought Israel's destruction. The prophet Daniel saw this protective work in his visions. When the angel described future conflicts facing Israel, he pointed to Michael as the one who ensures they survive. Not because Israel deserves it, not because they're perfect or righteous, but because God made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Michael's assignment is to make certain those promises remain unbroken, no matter what hell throws against them. Generation after generation, century after century, Michael maintained his watch. The Assyrians came with their war machine. The Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and carried the people into exile. The Greeks tried to force them to abandon their faith. The Romans crucified thousands. Yet through it all, a remnant survived. The Jewish people endured. The line of David continued. And in the fullness of time, the Messiah was born exactly as prophesied. None of that happened by accident. Michael fought for it. Every single day, every single battle, never resting, never giving up, never allowing the enemy to achieve the total victory they sought. Fire consumed their bodies, lions tore them apart, swords cut them down, crosses held their broken forms. Throughout history, those who followed God faced persecution that tested their faith to its absolute limit. And in their darkest moments, when death seemed certain and hope felt like a cruel joke, Michael stood guard over their souls. Physical death isn't the end of the story. Satan knows this. He can kill the body, but he can't touch the soul unless God permits it. And Michael's job includes making sure that when believers die, especially when they die for their faith, their spirits safely reach their eternal home. The persecution started early. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was stoned to death by a religious mob. Acts chapter 7 describes his death, and verse 59 tells us, "And they stoned Stephen as he was calling on God and saying, 'Lord Jesus, receive my spirit.'" Stephen didn't fear death because he knew something. He knew that the moment he died, he would be caught up into God's presence, and Michael was there to ensure no demonic power could intercept that journey. When Roman emperors turned their fury on Christians, when believers were thrown to wild animals for entertainment, when families were burned alive for refusing to worship Caesar, Satan tried to claim their souls in the moment of death. He wanted to torment them, to drag them into darkness, to prove that following God leads only to suffering and loss. Michael prevented it, every time, without fail. The spiritual battle during persecution is fiercer than most people realize. Demons gather at executions of believers. They wait, hoping to catch souls in that vulnerable moment between earthly life and eternal rest. They know they can't win ultimately, but they try anyway, driven by hatred and malice. And Michael meets them every time, sword drawn, power unleashed, making absolutely certain that not one person who dies trusting in God will be lost to the enemy. Revelation chapter 12 verse 11 speaks of believers who overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. These martyrs conquered because they refused to deny Christ even when facing execution. But they also conquered because Michael defended them in the spiritual realm, ensuring their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Even now, in countries where following Jesus means risking death, when believers face execution for their faith, Michael is there. He doesn't stop the physical death. That's not his assignment, but he guards the passage from this life to the next. He stands between the departing soul and any demonic force that would try to interfere. He makes certain that those who die in faith arrive safely in the presence of the God they served. Nations have spiritual rulers, not the human presidents and kings everyone can see, but invisible powers that claim authority over regions and work to keep populations in darkness. The Bible calls them principalities and powers. They're demons with territorial assignments, and they've held control over parts of the earth for thousands of years, but they don't have unlimited power. They can't do whatever they want. Something restrains them. Someone pushes back against their schemes, and often that someone is Michael. We saw a glimpse of this in Daniel chapter 10. The Prince of Persia, a demonic ruler over that empire, tried to prevent God's message from reaching Daniel. This wasn't a random demon. This was a powerful fallen angel with authority over an entire nation. He had the strength to block an angel sent from God's throne for 3 full weeks. That kind of power doesn't come from a minor devil. This was a principality, a spiritual ruler, someone high in Satan's hierarchy. Michael broke his hold. The Prince of Persia couldn't stand when Michael entered the fight. His power, as great as it was, meant nothing against heaven's supreme military commander. Then the angel mentioned something else in verse 20. When I have gone forth, indeed, the Prince of Greece will come. Another demonic prince, another territorial spirit. This one assigned to the Greek Empire that would rise after Persia fell. These aren't isolated cases. They're a pattern. Major nations and empires have spiritual powers ruling over them, influencing their leaders, shaping their cultures, working to spread darkness and oppose God's plans. Michael's job includes dealing with these princes. When they overstep their bounds, when they interfere with God's purposes, when they try to prevent the gospel from spreading or harm God's people, Michael steps in. He doesn't eliminate them completely. That's reserved for the final judgment. But he restrains them. He limits their power. He breaks their hold on regions so that light can enter. Think about what happens when the gospel enters a new area. Opposition arises. Spiritual resistance manifests. People who seemed open to truth suddenly turn hostile. Why? Because the demonic prince ruling that territory doesn't want to lose his grip. He mobilizes his forces to stop the advance of God's kingdom. And Michael counters those forces, creating openings for believers to establish a foothold. This battle continues right now. Every mission field, every nation resistant to the gospel, every region locked in spiritual darkness has demonic princes fighting to maintain control. They whisper lies to leaders. They stir up persecution. They create cultural barriers that make it nearly impossible for truth to penetrate. But Michael works constantly to restrain their power, to create windows of opportunity, to break down walls that demons have spent centuries building. Michael wins. Every time. Not sometimes, not usually, always. His perfect record across all of history, across every battle, against every enemy, tells us something crucial about how he achieves victory. It's not his personal strength alone, though he has immense power. It's not his strategic genius, though his tactical abilities are flawless. It's not even his courage or dedication, though both are absolute. Michael wins because he fights with the full authority of God backing every move he makes. Look at how he handled Satan in the dispute over Moses' body. Jude verse 9 shows us his method. The Lord rebuke you. Michael didn't say, I rebuke you. He invoked God's authority. He called down the power of the Almighty. He recognized that his own might, as great as it is, means nothing compared to the authority of the Creator. This same principle runs through every battle Michael fights. When he cast Satan from heaven, he did it as God's instrument. When he broke the hold of the Prince of Persia, he wielded divine authority. When he protects believers, when he restrains demons, when he executes any aspect of his assignment, he operates under direct orders from God's throne and carries the full weight of divine power with him. Revelation chapter 12 shows us the ultimate source of victory. Verse 11 states, "And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death." The blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ's sacrifice, provides the foundation for all victory over evil. Michael understands this. He fights not in his own name, but in the name of the one who died and rose again, who conquered death itself, who stripped Satan of any legitimate claim over those who believe. Satan can't stand against that authority. No demon can. No principality or power, no matter how ancient or strong, can resist when heaven's commander comes wielding the authority of Christ's finished work on the cross. Michael's sword cuts through demonic defenses, not because it's sharp, but because it's swung by someone operating under direct divine mandate. This is why Michael never loses. Loss would require God to be defeated. It would require divine authority. There's a pillar of salt standing somewhere on the western shore of the Dead Sea. According to legend, it's the remains of a woman who made one fatal choice. She looked back at the city she loved as it burned. Her name was never recorded, but her mistake echoes through 4,000 years of human history. The city she couldn't abandon was Sodom. Not the caricature you learned about in Sunday school, but a Bronze Age tech hub. Wealthy, sophisticated, powerful. It controlled the bitumen trade, the sealant that held the ancient world together. Its walls were 20 feet thick. Its markets overflowed with silks and spices and silver. From a distance, when the setting sun hit its limestone walls, the entire city glowed like hammered gold. And then, one morning, the sky tore open, and Sodom became the most famous mass grave in history. This is the story of what really happened in the Jordan Valley 4 millennia ago. The geology, the archaeology, the slow seduction of a righteous man named Lot, who pitched his tent toward prosperity and lost everything that mattered. It's a story about golden cages and the terrible price of looking back. So settle in. Turn off the distractions, because this isn't just ancient history, this is a mirror. There are moments in history when a man stands at a crossroads and the choice he makes echoes for millennia. This is the story of one such moment, a story of prosperity and ruin, of a garden that became a furnace, and of a single glance backward that turned flesh into salt. In the high country of Canaan, 2 men stood on the ridge of Bethel, looking down at the world spread before them like an offering. Abraham, the patriarch, weathered and patient. Lot, his nephew, younger, ambitious, hungry for the future. Between them stretched the Jordan Valley, a ribbon of green so lush it seemed almost obscene in the surrounding desert. The air was thick with moisture here, carrying the scent of wild fig and tamarisk. Below them, the river coiled through the plain like a serpent of silver, and at the far end of that serpent lay the 5 cities, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah.
Okay. Wait a minute.
Zebor.
I'm really positive. Okay, I used those tests. I don't even know when. I thought the range was like 8 chunks. Okay. Yes, one thing is left to do. Okay, actually do. Potions लेके आओ.
Oyim and Bella. From this distance, they looked like jewels scattered on green velvet. The flocks had grown too large. The land couldn't support them both anymore. It was time to divide. Abraham, ever the gentleman, gave his nephew first choice. "Is not the whole land before you?" he said. "If you take the left, I will go to the right. If you take the right, I will go to the left." Simple, clean, the offer of an older man who had already learned that grasping brings nothing but thorns. But Lot lifted his eyes and saw something Abraham had learned not to see. He saw water. He saw grass that stayed green even in summer. He saw cities with walls and gates, markets and industry. The Jordan plain was like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt itself. And in Lot's mind, a calculation began, a quiet, rational whisper that prosperity was not just a blessing, but a sign. Surely God favored those who thrived. Surely success meant approval. What he didn't calculate was this. The Jordan Valley in the 21st century before Christ was not the arid trench we know today. It was a subtropical delta fed by aquifers and seasonal floods, a place where date palms grew 40 feet tall and orchards produced 2 harvests a year. Water rights in this region were worth more than gold. And Lot, the herdsman, knew it. He chose the whole plain of Jordan and moved his tents eastward. The text says he pitched his tent as far as Sodom. But that phrase, as far as, carries a movement. It wasn't a destination. It was a trajectory. He didn't move into the city, not yet. He moved toward it. And that first step toward the shadow is always the easiest to justify. The wealth of Sodom didn't come from agriculture alone. It came from the earth itself, from the thick black seepages that bubbled up around the Dead Sea like wounds that wouldn't heal. The ancients called them the slime pits, but we know them as asphalt deposits, bitumen fields, natural petroleum reserves that ooze to the surface in sticky, sulfurous pools. The smell was unmistakable, a mix of tar and rot.
Let's see what I think I've to repeater. To comparator. एक में गन पाउडर, I didn't have to be a Shabash here.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this quick tutorial on the item sorter. Behind me, we have two different types of item sorters. We have the stackable item sorter and the non-stackable item sorter. Okay, let's start with this stackable item because we have a filter that has spot 41. It's counting down. Powered is items was down to here. Single item stackable item filter. This one was designed by, I believe, Mumbo Jumbo a couple years ago, and it still works today also. You can see it is up a little bit higher because it is actually sensing off the main feed line here. So I've moved down here and put a hopper with a comparator looking at it. And if we put in a single item, it only puts out an output of filter. But if you put a non-stackable item, it puts out a signal of 3. So if we go back up here, as we put a non-stackable item, it powers 3. So it's 1, 2, and then it will turn off this torch. Will then turn this off, which then turns this off, unpowering this block and unlocking this hopper and letting it flow through. So let's pop around to the front here and let's put in our pickaxe, some dirt, and our muddy puddle diamonds. As we hop down here, we let everything filter through. We will see we have our subscribe to rabbit pick. We should have our grass up.
We were home for some chats, and we have some chats.
Eggs, the scent of deep earth forced into daylight. And for the Bronze Age world, this was liquid gold. Bitumen was the sealant that made ships watertight, the mortar that held defensive walls together, the glue of empire. Egypt used it to embalm their dead. Babylon used it to waterproof their ziggurats, and Sodom controlled the supply. Caravans came from Mesopotamia, from the coast of Phoenicia, from the highlands of Anatolia, all seeking the black tar that made civilization possible. The cities of the plain weren't just prosperous. They were a tech hub, an ancient Silicon Valley built on a single, irreplaceable resource. Lot walked through the markets and smelled jasmine mixed with bitumen. He heard the ring of silver on merchant scales. He saw fabrics dyed with colors he couldn't name, jewelry worked with techniques he'd never seen, and beneath his feet, so subtle he almost didn't notice it, the ground hummed. A low-frequency vibration, like the earth was breathing. The Dead Sea sits on a fault line, the same geological rift that runs from Syria to Mozambique. And in those days, the pressure was building. The earth was restless. But who pays attention to omens when the market is booming? Lot didn't stay in his tent. That's the detail that tells you everything. He moved from a tent, mobile, temporary, the dwelling of a man passing through, to a house with a gate. This wasn't just an upgrade in comfort. It was a change in identity. A tent says, I'm a pilgrim. A house with a gate says, I'm a citizen. I belong here. The archaeology doesn't lie. At Tall El Hammam, just northeast of the Dead Sea, they found massive fortifications, walls 20 feet thick, gates with multiple chambers, towers that would have required thousands of laborers to construct. This wasn't a village. It was a fortress city, a place where wealth was guarded and status was measured in stone. Lot acquired property here. He built. He settled. And at night, he heard the sounds of the city, the music, the laughter, the revelry that went long past midnight and well into the hours when honest men should be sleeping. At first, it troubled him. The text says he was vexed in his righteous soul day after day. But here's the thing about vexation. It fades. The human ear adjusts to noise. The human conscience adjusts to compromise. What shocks you on Monday becomes normal by Friday. Lot began to lose the ability to distinguish vice from culture, cruelty from sophistication. The city called it progress. Lot called it civilization. And when they appointed him a judge at the gate, a position of honor, of influence, he accepted. He was part of the system now, not just a resident, an official, a man with a voice in the councils of power. And that voice, day by day, grew quieter on the things that mattered. The 5 cities weren't isolated outposts. They were a network, a confederation of trade and vice and mutual prosperity. Gomorrah specialized in textiles. Admah dealt in livestock. Zeboim controlled the northern trade routes. Bela, later called Zoar, was the smallest, a way station for travelers. And Sodom was the crown jewel, the hub where all roads met. Walk through that marketplace in your mind. Hear the haggling in a dozen languages. Smell roasted lamb and coriander. The tang of fermented wine. The heavy perfume oil that merchants used to mask the scent of bitumen that clung to everything. See the stalls piled with figs and pomegranates, with bolts of linen and bronze daggers, with idols carved from olive wood and painted with ochre. And watch, really watch, the way people move, the confident stride of the wealthy, the hurried shuffle of the poor, the careful eyes-down walk of the stranger, because in Sodom there was a hierarchy that everyone understood. The locals were protected, the merchants were tolerated, but the stranger, the foreigner, the poor traveler who came seeking shelter, they were sport. The prophet Ezekiel would later define the sin of Sodom this way: pride, fullness of bread, and an abundance of idleness. They had so much, they invented cruelty as entertainment. They turned exploitation into culture. And the marketplace, with all its color and wealth, was built on the backs of those who had no voice and no protection. A traveler enters the square, dusty, tired, looking for water. Watch what happens. The crowd doesn't ignore him. They notice. They circle. Someone bumps him. Someone else laughs. His coin purse is lighter when he leaves than when he arrived. And if he complains, the judges at the gate shrug. You should have been more careful, stranger. The city's pulse quickens during these moments, not with shame, with pleasure. And Lot, sitting at that gate, saw it, day after day, and said nothing. Abraham built altars, simple ones, rough stones piled in the open air, places to call on the name of the Lord under the sky. No priests, no rituals, no hierarchy. Just a man and his God, and the smoke of a sacrifice rising into the wind. You can still find those kinds of altars in the highlands of Judea, cairns of limestone, weathered and nameless, marking places where someone once cried out to heaven. But in the cities of the plain, the altars were different. They were enclosed, ornate, dark. The temples smelled of incense and animal musk and something else, something sour like fear. The gods here demanded more than worship. They demanded participation, ritual prostitution, child sacrifice in times of crisis. The priests wore gold, and the gold was bought with blood. Lot's daughters began to wear jewelry that reflected the local style. Crescent moons, serpents, the symbols of Ishtar and Molech. His wife attended the banquets at the temple. It wasn't apostasy, she said. It was culture. It was being a good neighbor. And Lot, the man who once walked with Abraham, said nothing, because by now his voice had grown too small to be heard over the sound of his own comfort. Then the heat came, not the normal heat of summer, but something else, an unnatural warmth that settled over the valley like a blanket made of iron. The air shimmered. The animals grew restless. At night, the stars seemed closer, brighter, almost angry. The water levels in the Dead Sea began to drop, exposing white crusts of salt along the shoreline. The old shepherds in the hills muttered about signs and seasons, about the way the earth felt before a storm that had no clouds. But in Sodom, the elite laughed. Omens were for primitives, shepherds who lived in tents and talked to invisible gods. Civilized people didn't fear the weather. They built walls against it. They controlled their environment. They were masters of their fate. Lot stood on the roof of his house one evening and looked toward the mountains where Abraham still lived. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a cold finger of dread tracing down his spine. The horizon looked wrong. The light looked wrong. Everything looked wrong. But when his wife called him down to dinner, he went. Because what can one man do against the momentum of an entire civilization? You go along. You survive. You tell yourself that surely, if there was real danger, someone would sound an alarm. And then, on the shimmering horizon to the west, 3 figures appeared, walking slowly, deliberately, toward the tent of Abraham at Mamre. And though Lot didn't see them, some part of him, some buried, suffocated part, knew. The reckoning had begun. The great oaks of Mamre were ancient even then, their trunks thick as houses, their branches spreading like the canopy of heaven itself. It was the heat of the day, that dead hour after noon, when even the insects fall silent and the air itself seems to hold its breath. Abraham sat in the shade of his tent door, an old man now, his beard white as wool, his eyes still sharp despite the years. And then he saw them, 3 men standing there as if they had simply materialized from the heat shimmer. He didn't ask where they came from. He didn't ask their names. He ran to them, ran, despite his age, despite the heat, and bowed himself to the ground. "My lords," he said, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." This is the ancient law of hospitality, the code that governed the desert and the highland both. A stranger at your tent door is not an inconvenience. He is a test. He is sacred. You bring water for his feet. You bring bread and meat. You give the best you have, not the leftovers, and you ask nothing in return. Abraham commanded his household like a general. Water, cakes of fine flour, a calf tender and good. Sarah, despite her age, despite her skepticism, baked bread with her own hands. The finest butter, the freshest milk. He stood by them under the tree while they ate, and he served them himself. Because some guests, you sense, carry eternity in their pockets. They asked about Sarah, and then one of them, the one whose voice carried a weight that made the leaves stop rustling, spoke a promise so absurd it made an old woman laugh behind the tent door. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah laughed, not with joy, with bitterness, with the tired cynicism of a woman whose body had betrayed her dreams decades ago. The visitor heard. "Why did Sarah laugh?" he asked. And Sarah, suddenly afraid, lied. "I did not laugh." The voice came back, quiet and terrible. "No, but you did laugh." And here is where the curtain tears. The visitor turned towards Sodom, and the atmosphere changed. The promise of life gave way to the necessity of death. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, he said. Their sin is very grave. "I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know." Abraham understood. The 3 were leaving. 2 of them, anyway. And the place they were going was the place where his nephew lived, where Lot's wife and daughters slept at night behind walls that would not hold. And Abraham, the friend of God, did something extraordinary. He started to negotiate. "Oh, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? 50 righteous people," he said. "Would you destroy the city if there are 50 righteous people in it?" The answer came back, "For 50, I will spare the whole place." Abraham pressed. 45, 40, 30, 20. Each time the same answer. "For the sake of that many, I will not destroy it." And then Abraham, his voice growing smaller, asked the final question. 10. "What if there are 10? For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." 10 righteous people in an entire city, not 10 perfect people. Just 10 who still had a conscience, a moral center, a capacity for shame. 10 people who would stand against the mob, who would protect the stranger, who would say no when the collective said yes. And even that, even 10, was a generous estimate. Because Abraham knew Sodom. He'd seen it from a distance. He'd heard the stories. And the terror in his voice as he bargained wasn't the terror of a man confident in his nephew's city. It was the terror of a man who suspected that 10 might be 9 too many. The Lord departed,
Oh my.
and the 2 messengers, angels, though they looked like ordinary men, turned their faces towards Sodom. And Abraham stood there watching them go, knowing he had done all he could, which is to say, knowing it was not enough. The road to Sodom was 14 miles of dust and heat, downhill all the way, descending from the highlands into the deep geological trench of the Dead Sea Basin. The 2 walked it in silence, their feet stirring small clouds with each step. And as they walked, the world around them changed. The birds stopped singing first, then the insects. The wind, which had been blowing steadily from the west, died. The air grew thicker, oppressive, charged with something that had no name but every living thing recognized. Shepherds in the hills pulled their flocks closer. Merchants on the road quickened their pace without knowing. The angels appeared unremarkable. Brown robes, dusty sandals, the weathered skin of men who walked long distances. Nothing about them suggested power or danger, and that was the point. Because this was a test, not of doctrine or belief, but of instinct. Would the city of Sodom, upon seeing 2 vulnerable strangers arriving at dusk, offer them protection? Or would it see them as prey? Lot was sitting in the gate when they arrived. The gate of a city in the ancient Near East wasn't just an entrance. It was the courthouse, the marketplace, the political nerve center. Men of standing sat there to see and be seen, to adjudicate disputes, to conduct business. And Lot had a seat at that gate now, a place of honor. He'd made it. He was somebody. And then he saw them. 2 men, strangers, walking toward the city as the sun touched the western hills. And Lot felt something he hadn't felt in years, a jolt of recognition, a spike of holy fear that cut through all the accumulated comfort and compromise. He didn't know who they were, but he knew what they were, and he knew with absolute certainty that they could not spend the night in the square. He rose and went to them, bowing low. "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They refused at first. "No," they said, "we will spend the night in the town square." And Lot pressed them urgently. He didn't explain why. He didn't have to. The desperation in his voice said everything. Finally, they turned aside to his house. And Lot, walking quickly, almost running, felt the eyes of the city on his back. Inside, he made them a feast, unleavened bread, bread made without yeast, baked in haste, the same bread that would later mark the Passover, the night of blood and deliverance. That was the plan. They had plans. There was a banquet at the magistrate's house. Important people would be there. But Lot, for once, didn't yield. These men stay. These men eat. These men are under my roof, and under my roof they are safe. His wife relented, but the look on her face was clear. "You're embarrassing us. This isn't how civilized people behave." Outside, the sun descended toward the horizon, and the city of Sodom prepared for evening. The streets began to fill, the torches were lit, the markets closed, the taverns opened. And somewhere in that transition between day and night, a murmur started. 2 strangers at Lot's house, young, handsome, unprotected. The sunset that evening was extraordinary. The kind of sunset that painters spend their lives trying to capture and never quite succeed. The western sky turned gold, then amber, then a deep, burning orange. And the light, the horizontal light of the dying sun, hit the limestone walls of Sodom and transformed them. For 20 minutes, the whole city glowed as if it were made of hammered gold, beautiful, radiant, a lie told in light. Lot stood at his window and watched it. And for a moment, just a moment, he remembered his first day in this valley. He'd been younger then, eager, full of hope. He'd looked at this city and seen opportunity, prosperity, the future. He'd pitched his tent towards Sodom, and then he'd moved into Sodom, and then he'd become Sodom. And now, standing in his fine house with his fine robes and his position at the gate, he felt something he couldn't name. Not quite regret, not quite grief. More like the phantom pain of an amputation, the ache for something that used to be part of you, but isn't anymore. The sky above was wrong, though. Beneath the gold and amber there was a bruised purple, the color of a healing wound, the color of deep water where light doesn't reach. Atmospheric scientists would tell you it's caused by particulates in the upper atmosphere, by dust and ash that scatter light in unusual ways. The ancients would tell you it's the color of heaven holding its breath. But for truth, the first torch was lit in the street below, and then another and another, and the murmur that had started at dusk grew into a rumble, and the rumble grew into voices, and the voices grew into a crowd, and the crowd moved like a single organism toward the house where Lot had taken his guests. Lot heard them coming. He heard the footsteps, the laughter, the low, excited chatter of people about to do something they know is wrong, but have convinced themselves is right. And then the knock came. Not gentle, not tentative, the hard, rhythmic pounding of fists and staffs against wood. The sound of a mob that has already made up its mind. Lot looked at the two strangers in his house. They sat calmly, watching him, their faces unreadable. And Lot understood in that moment that this was not a test of them. It was a test of him, of his city, of everything he had built and become. He walked to the door. His hands were shaking. His wife grabbed his arm. "Don't," she hissed, "don't make a scene. Let them have what they want. It's not worth it." But Lot shook her off. Because some things, even for a compromised man, even for a coward, are worth it. He opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him, alone, facing the city he had called home. And all of Sodom looked back at him with a single, hungry smile. The street was packed. Not just the young men, not just the troublemakers who prowl the edges of civilization looking for chaos. All of them, young and old, merchants and laborers, the men who sat at the gate during the day, dispensing justice, the fathers who blessed their children at night. All of them pressed together in the flickering torchlight, their faces transformed by the alchemy of the mob into something that wasn't quite human anymore. "Where are the men who came to you tonight?" they called. "Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Know them. The Hebrew word is yada, to know intimately, carnally. This wasn't curiosity. It was violation as a weapon, rape as dominance, the final assertion of a city's power over anyone who dared to enter without permission. And Lot, standing alone between his door and the mob, felt the full weight of his failure. He had lived among these people for decades. He had done business with them. He had judged their disputes. He had called them neighbors, and now he saw them for what they were, for what they had always been, for what he, perhaps, had become. He raised his hands. "Please, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." Brothers. Even now he used that word. Even now he tried to appeal to something that had died long ago. "Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." Silence. For one terrible heartbeat, silence. And then the daughters, listening from inside, heard their father offer them to the mob. Their own father. The man who was supposed to stand between them and the world. Something broke in that house that would never be repaired. The trust, the bond, the invisible architecture that holds a family together. The crowd didn't accept the offer, not because they had standards, but because the offer itself was an insult. This fellow came in to stay as a foreigner, they shouted, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. They surged forward, pressing against Lot, pushing him back against his own door. The smell of them, wine and sweat and torch smoke and something darker, something animal, washed over him. He was going to die here, killed by his neighbors, in front of his own house. And no one would call it murder. They would call it justice. And then the door opened behind him. Hands reached out, strong hands, hands that felt like they were carved from stone, and pulled him inside. The door slammed shut, and through the narrow window a light blazed. Not firelight, not torchlight, something else, something that didn't flicker or fade but burned steady and white and impossibly bright. The mob screamed, not in anger, in pain, in terror. The light struck them like a physical blow, and they clutched at their faces, stumbling backward, falling over each other in their haste to escape something they couldn't see, because seeing was suddenly beyond them. They were blind, not in darkness, that would have been a mercy. They were blind in light. Their eyes were open but saw nothing, their pupils seared by a brilliance that wasn't meant for human vision. Medical science has a term for this. Photokeratitis, flash burn to the cornea. It's what happens when you stare at an arc welder or at the sun during an eclipse. The pain is immediate and absolute, a sensation.
Make sure the top and the bottom are set to 20 ticks. Take at least 2 ominous bottles. Sword enchant sharpness. Yeah, as the same. Click this lever. Activate your auto clicker and hold buttons by pressing both. Or use your regular with 1500 ms. I think we should take 1 or 2 more.
like sand, rubbed into your eyes mixed with the deep ache of tissue damage. And these men felt it all at once, all of them, as if they had stared directly into the birth of stars. But here is the horror. They didn't leave. Even blind, even stumbling, even weeping from the pain, they continued to grope for the door. Their hands scratched at the wood, feeling for the latch, the hinges, any weakness they could exploit. Because the mob, once formed, doesn't have a conscience. It doesn't have reason. It has only appetite. And these men, even in their blindness, were still hungry. Inside the house, Lot collapsed against the wall, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The two strangers stood over him, and now there was no mistaking what they were. The air around them shimmered. Their voices, when they spoke, carried harmonics that shouldn't exist in human speech. "Do you have anyone else here?" they asked. "Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone you have in the city. Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy it, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Destroy. The word hung in the air like smoke. Not reform, not judge. Destroy. Total. Final. The kind of ending that leaves nothing to rebuild from. Lot ran. Out into the night. Through streets where blind men still wept and cursed. To the houses of his sons-in-law. The young men who had married his daughters. Who had mocked his old-fashioned values while enjoying his wealth and position. He pounded on their doors. It was past midnight now, the dead hour, when even drunkards have found their beds. The sons-in-law answered, annoyed, sleep-heavy. "Up!" Lot cried. "Get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." They stared at him, his hair wild, his eyes wide, the smell of fear pouring off him like perfume. And they laughed. Not cruel laughter. Not yet. Just the tired, patronizing laughter of young men who think their father-in-law has finally lost his mind. "Come now, old man," they said. "You've had a bad dream. Too much wine. Go home. Sleep it off. The city isn't going anywhere." He seemed to them to be jesting. That phrase carries a weight that translation can barely hold. It wasn't that they didn't believe in judgment. It was that they couldn't conceive of judgment happening to them. Here, in this city with its walls and wealth and sophisticated culture, judgment was for primitives, for tent dwellers, for people who hadn't evolved past superstition. And so they closed their doors, and Lot stood in the empty street, and the weight of his own irrelevance crushed him like a stone. He returned home as the first grey light touched the eastern horizon. 3 in the morning, the hour of ghosts and decisions. The angels were waiting. "Arise," they said. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." Simple. Delicate. But Lot didn't know. He stood in his house and looked at his possessions. The fine cedar table from Lebanon, the Egyptian linen, the silver cups he had used to taste success and seal contracts, the jewelry his wife wore to the temple banquets, the idols, small ones, tasteful ones, that his daughters kept in their rooms because everyone had them, and it didn't mean anything, not really. Each object carried a memory, a story, a piece of the life he had built. And now these strangers were telling him to walk away, to leave it all, to become a refugee again, a nomad, a man without a city. His wife was weeping, not from fear of destruction, but from the thought of loss. "We can't leave all this," she said. "We've worked so hard. We've earned this." And Lot, standing in his fine house wearing his fine robes, felt paralyzed, because the golden cage, once you've lived in it long enough, stops feeling like a cage. It feels like home, and the door standing open looks less like freedom and more like suicide. The angels didn't argue. They didn't give him time to think. They reached out and seized him by the hand, seized his wife by the hand, seized his daughters by the hand, and pulled. And the sensation was like being grabbed by machinery, by iron wrapped in flesh. There was no gentleness in it, no concern for comfort. It was pure force, pure necessity. The text says, "The Lord being merciful unto him." And this is what mercy looks like sometimes. Not soft words and patient waiting, but holy violence. Being dragged from the burning house because you've lost the capacity to run. They pulled the family through the streets, past the houses where blind men still wept, past the temple where the priests slept unaware, past the gates that had seemed so strong and were about to become dust. And at the edge of the city, at the boundary between Sodom and the rest of creation, they set them down. "Escape for your life," the angels commanded. "Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." The hills, the mountains, the rough, poor country where Abraham still lived in his tent. Lot looked at those mountains, dark against the graying sky, and felt a cold fist close around his heart. He couldn't do it. After years of civilization, of comfort, of status, he couldn't go back to being nobody. "Oh no, my lords," he said, his voice breaking. "You have shown me great kindness in saving my life, but I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." Zoar, the smallest of the 5 cities, still part of the valley, still part of the system, just smaller. Safer, he told himself, more reasonable. Lot, the coward, the compromiser, negotiating even at the threshold of apocalypse. And the angel, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of exhaustion, agreed. "Behold, I grant you this favor also. I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive." So they ran, Lot and his wife and his daughters, stumbling through the grey pre-dawn toward the small city on the plain. The air had changed. It felt thick now, heavy, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. A humming began, low, subsonic, felt more than heard. The animals sensed it first. Dogs began to howl in the valley. Birds took flight in confused, panicked flocks. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Behind them, in Sodom, the first citizens were waking. Bakers firing their ovens, merchants preparing their stalls, guards changing shifts at the gate. The blind men from the night before were being tended by physicians who couldn't explain what had happened. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. The sun was about to rise. Just another day in the greatest city of the Jordan Plain. And Lot ran, his lungs burning, his legs weak from years of soft living, toward a city called Zoar. The sun touched the eastern horizon. Light spilled across the valley like gold poured from heaven. Beautiful, radiant, the last sunrise Sodom would ever see. The sky tore open. That's the only way to describe what happened at dawn on that morning 4,000 years ago. The people of Sodom, waking to what they thought would be another ordinary day, looked up and saw the heavens split. A brightness appeared in the upper atmosphere. Not the gradual glow of sunrise, but a sudden searing white that made the sun itself look dim. A fireball, larger than the moon, screaming toward Earth at 17 miles per second. Modern science calls it a meteoric airburst, a chunk of rock and ice from the asteroid belt, perhaps 500 feet across, entering the atmosphere at hypersonic speed. The friction generates heat. Not gradually, but instantly. Thousands of degrees. The surface of the meteor vaporizes, creating a plasma sheath that glows brighter than any star. And then, at an altitude of about 2 miles above the Jordan Plain, the internal pressure becomes too great. The meteor explodes. 10 megatons. The equivalent of 600 Hiroshima bombs detonating simultaneously in midair. The shockwave spreads outward at supersonic speed, a wall of compressed air that flattens everything in its path. But before the shockwave comes, the light. A thermal pulse so intense it flash burns everything within line of sight. Stone doesn't just heat, it melts. Sand doesn't just warm, it fuses into glass. In Sodom, the baker reaching for his oven never completed the motion. The merchant unrolling his awning never saw it unfurl. The mother nursing her infant had no time to scream. The light hit them first. A brightness that seared through closed eyelids, that turned skin to char in the fraction of a second it takes for a synapse to fire. And then the heat. The air itself became fire. Temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Flesh vaporized. Bone turned to powder. The beautiful limestone walls, still glowing gold in the first rays of dawn, liquefied like wax. The people of Sodom didn't have time to understand what was happening. They didn't have time to pray, or curse, or run. One moment they existed. The next, they were vapor and shadow and ash. 60,000 people, gone between one heartbeat and the next. Entire generations erased in the time it takes to blink. But the fire from above was only the beginning. Beneath Sodom, beneath the entire Jordan plain, lay those vast deposits of bitumen, the black gold that had made the 5 cities rich. Miles of subterranean petroleum, trapped in porous limestone, pressurized by geological forces, waiting. The thermal pulse from the airbursts superheated the surface layers. The shock wave that followed fractured the bedrock, and the bitumen ignited. Fire came from below. Geysers of burning petroleum erupted from the slime pits. The ground itself split open, vomiting flame like the mouth of a dragon. The smell, God, the smell, sulfur and burning oil and superheated rock, a stench so acrid it would scorch the lungs of anyone who breathed it. Brimstone, the ancient texts called it. Burning sulfur, the signature scent of judgment. The cities burned from both directions. Fire rained from above, fire erupted from below, and in between, caught in a vice of flame, Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim became hell on earth. The heat was so intense that the sand of the plain fused into trinitite, the same glassy substance found at nuclear tests.
Once you or use a regular using so it really does work. नीचे कहीं जनरेट हो जा रहा, उधर कहीं जनरेट हो जा रहा. I'm positive that's not the case. Nope, nothing over here. I don't think this one's the case either. I don't see the raids working. Okay, this is 1.21.11 का farm. Kill. No.
Sites.
Okay, I guess we are going to